The first time I heard Alan whisper those words, I pretended not to hear them. It was during last Thanksgiving at our family home in Brookhaven, a suburb just outside of Atlanta. I'd stepped out to the back porch for a moment of peace, away from the noise of football games and grandchildren. The Georgia autumn had painted the maple trees in my backyard in brilliant shades of amber and crimson. As I stood there breathing in the crisp air, I heard the sliding door open behind me. "I'm telling you, Sarah, we can't keep waiting forever." It was Alan's voice speaking to my daughter in hushed tones. The old man just turned 70. Why is he still alive? My father was gone at 62. My hands gripped the wooden railing of the porch. My son-in-law didn't realize I was there, partially hidden by the shadow of the old oak tree my late wife Margaret had insisted we keep when we built the house 40 years ago. "Alan, please," Sarah whispered back. "Not now." "Your sister agrees with me," Alan continued, his voice low but urgent. "That house in Hilton Head alone is worth over $2 million, and with the business—" "I said not now," Sarah hissed, and I heard the door slide shut. I stood there, the cool November air suddenly feeling much colder against my skin. For several minutes I didn't move, letting the weight of what I'd just heard settle into my bones like the arthritis that had been creeping into my joints over the past few years. Margaret would have known what to say, what to do. But Margaret had been gone for 3 years now, taken by the same aggressive pancreatic cancer that had claimed her mother. In the decades we'd been together, she'd been my moral compass, my voice of reason. Without her, I often felt adrift, especially when it came to our daughters. Sarah and Rebecca had always been different as night and day. Sarah, our firstborn, practical and cautious like me, an accountant who measured life in spreadsheets and projections. Rebecca, 5 years younger, impulsive and creative like her mother, running a small art gallery in Savannah that perpetually operated in the red. But they were both my daughters, my flesh and blood. I'd worked 70-hour weeks for 35 years to give them opportunities I never had growing up in rural Georgia. I never finished high school, but I built Hartwell Construction from the ground up. Started with a single truck and a toolbox. Ended up with 27 employees and commercial contracts across 3 states. Margaret had managed the books in the early days, working nights after putting the girls to bed. We'd saved and invested, lived below our means, bought property when prices were low. The retirement home in Hilton Head had been Margaret's dream. We'd only enjoyed 2 summers there together before her diagnosis. Now it sat mostly empty, a beautiful beachfront property that I couldn't bear to visit alone, but couldn't bring myself to sell. I took a deep breath and turned back toward the house, watching through the window as my family moved about in the warm light of the dining room. Sarah directing the placement of dishes, her husband Alan checking his phone with disinterest, Rebecca pouring wine, her latest boyfriend, a bearded fellow named Troy or Trey, helping my grandchildren set the table. I should have confronted them then, should have walked right back in and asked Alan to repeat what he'd said to my face. But something stopped me, perhaps the same instinct that had helped me navigate tough business negotiations over the years. Sometimes information was power, but only if the other side didn't know you had it. A week later, Alan called me. His voice was different on the phone, respectful, solicitous, concerned about my well-being in a way that now felt hollow. "Frank, I hope you're doing well. Sarah and I were just talking about you." "That so?" I kept my tone neutral as I sat in my home office, looking out at the December rain pattering against the window. "Yeah, we're worried about you being alone in that big house, especially with winter coming." I'd been alone in this house for 3 years. Winter had come and gone 3 times since Margaret passed. Their concern, suddenly manifesting after Thanksgiving, rang false. "I managed just fine," I said. "What's on your mind, Alan?" A pause, then, "Well, I was hoping to discuss a business opportunity with you. Something I've been working on that I think could be really promising. Would you have time for lunch this week?" I agreed to meet him at McKinnon's Steakhouse in Buckhead the following day. As I hung up, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder I'd purchased years ago for taking notes at job sites. I turned it over in my hand, considering what I was about to do. Margaret wouldn't have approved. "Frank Hartwell," she would have said, "you talk to your daughters directly. That's how we've always done things." But Margaret wasn't here, and I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. McKinnon's was Alan's kind of place. Expensive steaks, leather booths, bartenders who made a show of mixing old fashions. He'd chosen it, no doubt, to set a particular tone for our meeting. I arrived 15 minutes early, the recorder tucked into the inner pocket of my jacket, already running. Alan showed up 12 minutes late, not bothering to apologize as he slid into the booth across from me. At 45, he still had the same carefully cultivated appearance he'd had when he married Sarah 15 years ago. Expensive haircut, tailored shirt, the kind of tan that came from memberships at exclusive clubs rather than honest work in the sun. "Frank, good to see you," he said, signaling for a waiter. "Bourbon, neat?" he ordered, then looked at me. "The usual scotch for you?" I nodded, though I'd planned to stick with water. Better to let him think this was a normal lunch between father-in-law and son-in-law. "So," I said after our drinks arrived, "what's this business opportunity?" Alan leaned forward, his expression shifting to what I recognized as his pitch face. Before marrying Sarah, he'd worked in pharmaceutical sales. Now he ran a medical equipment leasing company that Sarah had helped him start with a generous loan from me, $200,000 that we both knew would never be repaid. "I've got a chance to acquire a competitor," he said. "Mitchell Medical Supply. The owner's retiring, looking for a quick sale. Their client list includes 3 major hospital systems we've been trying to get into for years." I nodded, taking a small sip of my scotch. "Sounds promising." "It is. Very. The problem is timing." Alan swirled his bourbon. "The owner wants to close before year-end for tax purposes. I need to move fast, but my capital is tied up in other investments that I can't liquidate quickly without taking a major hit." "Here it comes," I thought. "I need a bridge loan," he continued. "Just for 6 months, maybe less. 500,000. Once the acquisition is complete, I can refinance the whole package with the bank at much better terms." I kept my expression neutral. "That's a significant amount." Alan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's actually quite modest considering the potential. Mitchell did $2.8 million in revenue last year. Their contracts are solid. The ROI here is a no-brainer." "I see," I said. "And you've discussed this with Sarah?" "Of course." Alan took a larger swallow of his bourbon. "She thinks it's an excellent opportunity, but she also thought we should keep our finances separate from family whenever possible. That's why I'm proposing this as a formal loan with market rate interest. Say 6%? Current business loans were running at least 8%. He knew that as well as I did. "What about your investors? The ones you mentioned last year at Christmas?" A flash of annoyance crossed his face. "Market conditions have changed. They're taking a more conservative approach right now." Translation: no one else would give him the money. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "Review the prospectus, talk to my financial advisor." Of course. Alan's tone was conciliatory, but I could see tension in his jaw. "I can send over all the documentation this afternoon. But Frank, I do need an answer fairly quickly. By the end of the week, ideally." I nodded, taking another small sip. "And how are things otherwise? How's Sarah?" "She's good, busy with the tax season approaching." He glanced at his watch, making it clear this personal chat wasn't on his agenda. "And the kids? Tommy still enjoying soccer?" "Football now," Alan corrected, his impatience barely concealed. "Listen, Frank, I've got another meeting at 2. Can I count on you to look at this opportunity seriously? It's a win-win for the family." Family. The word hung in the air between us, suddenly seeming hollow. "I always take family seriously, Alan," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "You can count on that." Back at home, I sat in my office and replayed the recording. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Gerald Meacham, my attorney for the past 30 years. The second was to Mike Donovan, a private investigator Gerald had recommended when we'd had problems with employee theft at one of our job sites years ago. "I need information," I told Mike after explaining the situation. "Everything you can find on Alan Prescott and Mitchell Medical Supply. And I need to know if my daughters have been discussing my estate or finances with anyone. Bank records, emails, phone records, whatever you can access legally." "Legally being the operative word," Mike said with a knowing tone. "I'll see what I can do. It'll take some time, and it won't be cheap." "I've got time," I replied, "and money isn't an issue." As I hung up, I looked at the photo of Margaret on my desk. She was smiling from our dock in Hilton Head, the sunset painting her silver hair with golden light. "I'm sorry, Maggie," I whispered, "but I need to know the truth." Over the next few days, I avoided Alan's calls. I told my assistant Diane, who still came in 3 days a week to help manage my remaining business interests, to tell him I was considering his proposal but needed more time. On the 4th day, Sarah called. "Dad, are you avoiding Alan?" Her voice had that familiar note of exasperation. The same tone she'd used as a teenager when she thought I was being unreasonable. Not avoiding, just doing my due diligence, I replied, sitting in my favorite chair in the living room where Margaret and I used to watch old movies on Sunday afternoons. Due diligence? Sarah scoffed. It's a straightforward business loan, not a corporate merger. $500,000 is still $500,000, Sarah. A pause. I know it seems like a lot, she said, her voice softening. But this opportunity is really important to Alan, to us. I understand that, but I need to be prudent. Sarah sighed. Dad, you're 70 years old. The money's just sitting in accounts. You always said you wanted to help us succeed. There it was, the first direct reference to my age, to the clock ticking on my life and, by extension, their inheritance. I do want to help you succeed, Sarah. I've always wanted that. Then help us now. Alan's business is our future. The kids' college funds, our retirement. I closed my eyes, suddenly tired. Let me talk to Rebecca first. I want to make sure any financial decisions I make are fair to both of you. Rebecca? Sarah's voice sharpened. What does Rebecca have to do with this? She's not involved in Alan's business. No, but she's my daughter too. You know I've always tried to be equitable. Dad, with all due respect, Rebecca blows through money like water. Her gallery has never turned a profit. If you give her an equal say in your financial decisions, you might as well flush the money down the toilet. The harshness in her tone surprised me. Sarah and Rebecca had their differences, but I'd never heard Sarah speak about her sister with such contempt. Nevertheless, I'll be speaking with her, and I'll let you know my decision about Alan's loan next week. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time, the weight of betrayal settling deeper into my chest. Then I called Rebecca. Daddy. Her voice was warm, genuinely pleased to hear from me. I was just thinking about you. There's an exhibition next month I think you'd really enjoy. That sounds nice, Becca, I said. Using the nickname from her childhood. But I was calling about something else. I was wondering if you could come up to Atlanta this weekend. There's something I need to discuss with you. Is everything okay? Are you sick? The immediate concern in her voice made my chest tighten. No, nothing like that. Nothing. I'm fine. Just some financial matters I want to go over with you in person. Financial matters? Her voice held confusion rather than the sudden interest I might have expected if she'd been party to Alan and Sarah's discussions. Sure, I can come up Saturday. Want me to stay over? If you don't mind. It would be nice to have some time together. After hanging up, I called Mike Donovan. I need whatever you've got so far. By Saturday. Saturday morning, I was waiting for Rebecca with a pot of coffee and the cheese Danish she'd always loved. She arrived in her beat-up Subaru, her curly hair, so like Margaret's, pulled back in a loose ponytail, paint stains on the cuffs of her jeans. She hugged me tightly in the doorway. You look good, Dad, she said, studying my face. But you sounded serious on the phone. What's going on? I led her to the kitchen table, poured coffee for both of us, and then simply asked, Becca, has Sarah or Alan talked to you about my money? About what will happen after I'm gone? Rebecca's eyes widened. What? No. Dad, are you sure you're not sick? The genuine shock on her face told me what I needed to know, but I pressed on. Alan mentioned to Sarah that you agreed with him about something, about my house in Hilton Head, about my business assets. Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. Wait, is this about Thanksgiving? When Alan cornered me before dinner, I nodded, waiting. He was asking all these questions about your will, about whether you'd considered setting up some kind of trust for the business assets. Rebecca shook her head. I told him it wasn't any of my business and that he should talk to you directly if he had concerns. Did he say why he was asking? Rebecca stirred cream into her coffee. Her brow furrowed. He said something about how it would be a shame for the government to take half of everything you'd built through estate taxes. That proper planning could keep more money in the family. I nodded slowly. And what did you say? I said that you'd always been careful with money and I was sure you had things handled. She looked up, her eyes, Margaret's eyes, concerned. Dad, what's really going on? I took a deep breath and told her everything. The conversation I'd overheard, Alan's loan request, Sarah's call. As I spoke, Rebecca's expression shifted from disbelief to hurt, to anger. Those vultures, she whispered when I finished. I knew Alan was materialistic, but I never thought Sarah would. She couldn't complete the sentence. I need to be sure, I said. That's why I hired someone to look into things. Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. You hired a private investigator? Dad, that's That's like something out of a movie. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Mike Donovan stood on my porch, a leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. In his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and the watchful eyes of a man who'd spent decades observing people at their worst, Mike didn't look like the private eyes from the crime shows Margaret used to watch. He looked more like the community college professor he'd been before changing careers after his divorce. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I have some preliminary findings to share." I introduced him to Rebecca, whose expression wavered between disbelief and curiosity as we settled in my home office. "I'll cut to the chase," Mike said, pulling several folders from his bag. "Mitchell Medical Supply is in trouble. They're being investigated by the Georgia Insurance Commissioner's office for potential fraud, specifically billing for equipment that was never delivered to patients." He passed me a printout of an email. "This is from the commissioner's office to their primary hospital client dated 6 weeks ago. The owner isn't retiring. He's trying to unload the business before charges are filed." I felt a cold anger building as I scanned the document. "Alan would have known this." Mike nodded. "Almost certainly. Almost. It's not public yet, but in the industry, people talk." He pulled out another folder. "As for your daughter and son-in-law's finances, they're carrying a lot more debt than their lifestyle would suggest." He showed me credit card statements, mortgage documents, and bank records that painted a troubling picture. Alan and Sarah were spending well beyond their means. Private school tuition for both children, a country club membership, a timeshare in Aspen, 3 luxury vehicles. "They've also been making inquiries," Mike continued, his tone professional but gentle, recognizing the personal nature of what he was revealing. "Your son-in-law had lunch with an estate attorney last month. Your daughter has been researching Georgia probate law, and they've both been looking into the current market value of your commercial properties and the Hilton Head House." Rebecca made a small, distressed sound beside me. "I can't believe Sarah would be part of this." Mike gave her a sympathetic look. People can rationalize almost anything when money's involved, especially when they're in financial trouble. He pulled out one final document. "This is the most concerning. 2 weeks ago, your son-in-law contacted a geriatric care manager. He was asking about assisted living facilities and the process for declaring someone mentally incompetent to handle their own affairs." My hands clenched into fists on the desk. "They were planning to have me declared incompetent?" Mike nodded grimly. "It appears that way. The loan request may have been Plan B when they realized that route would be challenging without clear evidence of cognitive decline." Rebecca reached over and gripped my hand, her fingers cold. "Dad, this is horrible. What are you going to do?" I looked at the evidence spread across my desk, the tangible proof of my daughter and son-in-law's betrayal. 45 years of hard work, of sacrifices made for my family, and this was how they viewed me, as an obstacle to their inheritance, a problem to be managed or removed. "I'm going to get some advice," I said finally, "from Gerald, and then I'm going to make some changes." The following Monday I called Alan. "Frank, I've been trying to reach you," he said, false heartiness in his voice. "Have you had a chance to consider my proposal?" "I have," I replied calmly. "In fact, I've given it a great deal of thought. I'd like to discuss it with you and Sarah in person. Can you come by the house tomorrow evening, say around 7? "Tomorrow?" Alan's voice held a note of impatience. "Frank, I don't mean to pressure you, but time really is of the essence here." "I understand. That's why I want to meet tomorrow. I've made my decision, but there are some details I'd like to go over in person." A pause. "All right, we'll be there at 7. After hanging up, I called Gerald Meacham. "They're coming tomorrow night. Is everything ready?" "All the paperwork is prepared," Gerald confirmed. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Frank? It's going to change your relationship with Sarah permanently." "Sarah changed our relationship," I said, the pain of that reality still fresh. "I'm just acknowledging it." The next evening, I sat in my living room waiting. Gerald had arrived earlier, his briefcase full of documents. Rebecca had offered to be present, but I'd asked her to stay away. This confrontation needed to happen without her being caught in the middle. At 7:12 p.m., Alan was never on time. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Sarah and Alan on my porch, both dressed as if coming from work. Sarah stepped forward to kiss my cheek, a gesture that now felt hollow. "Dad, you're looking well," she said. I led them into the living room, where Gerald stood to greet them. "Gerald?" Sarah's expression showed confusion. "Why is your attorney here, Dad?" "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the sofa. Gerald is here because we're discussing a significant financial transaction. I thought it would be prudent to have him present. Alan's expression brightened, clearly interpreting the attorney's presence as a good sign for his loan request. Very wise, Frank. Always best to have the legalities properly handled. I took a seat across from them, Gerald beside me. Before we discuss your loan request, Alan, I want to ask you both a direct question. Have you been discussing my estate, my finances, or plans to have me declared mentally incompetent? The blood drained from Sarah's face. Alan's expression froze in a half-smile. Dad, what are you talking about? Sarah's voice wavered. I looked at them steadily. I heard you at Thanksgiving, on the porch. Why is he still alive? That's what you said, Alan. And then you mentioned the value of the Hilton Head house. Alan recovered first. Frank, you clearly misheard. I would never. I have it recorded, I interrupted, which wasn't technically true about the porch conversation, but I did have the lunch meeting recorded. Just as I have our lunch conversation recorded, where you neglected to mention that Mitchell Medical Supply is under investigation for fraud. Sarah turned to Alan, her expression shocked. What? What investigation? Alan's face hardened. This is ridiculous. You're confused, Frank. This is exactly why Sarah and I have been concerned. I've also seen the records of your meeting with the geriatric care manager, I continued, my voice steady despite the pain lancing through my chest, and your consultations with estate attorneys and your financial records showing you're deeply in debt. Sarah stood suddenly. You've been spying on us, having us investigated? Dad, how could you? How could I? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd changed diapers for, taught to ride a bike, walked down the aisle. How could you, Sarah? You're my daughter. I worked my entire life to give you opportunities, security. And this is how you repay that? By waiting for me to die? By plotting to have me declared incompetent if I don't die fast enough for your liking? Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from shame or anger. You don't understand. We've had financial difficulties. Alan's business has been mismanaged, I cut in. I've seen the numbers, Sarah. The vacations, the cars, the club memberships. You've been living beyond your means for years. Alan stood now too, his face flushed with anger. You had no right to pry into our personal finances. We came here in good faith to discuss a business opportunity. A fraudulent business you were trying to buy with my money. I corrected him. No, Alan. There will be no loan. Not now, not ever. Gerald cleared his throat. Perhaps this would be a good time to review the documents I've prepared, Frank. I nodded, and Gerald opened his briefcase, removing several folders. What documents? Sarah asked, her voice small. I've made some changes to my estate plan, I said. In light of what I've learned about your intentions. Gerald handed them each a document. This is a summary of the Frank and Margaret Hartwell Charitable Foundation, which has now been established as the primary beneficiary of Mr. Hartwell's estate. Sarah's hands trembled as she took the paper. Charitable Foundation? Dad, what have you done? I've protected my legacy, I replied. 90% of my estate, the business, the properties, my investments, will go to the foundation upon my death. The foundation will support education for first-generation college students and vocational training programs. Things your mother and I always believed in. 90%? Alan's voice was strangled. This is insane. You can't do this. I assure you he can, Gerald said mildly. The foundation is already established. The amendments to his will and trust are executed and legally binding. Sarah sank back onto the couch. The paper crumpled in her hand. What about us, your grandchildren? You and Rebecca will each receive 5% of my estate, I said, which is still a substantial sum, but the bulk of what I've built will go to helping young people who value education and hard work, values I apparently failed to instill in my own family. Alan threw the paper down. This is elder abuse. You've been manipulated, Frank. We'll contest this. On what grounds? Gerald interrupted, his tone still professional but with an edge of steel. Mr. Hartwell has been thoroughly evaluated by 2 independent physicians who have certified his mental competence. We have documented your attempts to defraud him and potentially have him declared incompetent for your financial gain. Should you choose to contest the will, all of this evidence will become part of the public record. The room fell silent. Sarah stared at the floor, tears running down her cheeks. Alan stood rigid, his jaw clenched. I think it's time for you to leave, I said finally. I need some time, and I imagine you do too. After they left, Gerald placed a hand on my shoulder. That was difficult, Frank. I'm sorry it came to this. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. Thank you for your help, Gerald. What now? He asked. Now, I said, looking around the empty house that had once been filled with family and laughter. I start the next chapter. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into establishing the foundation. I hired Ellen Martinez, a dynamic former school principal, to serve as the executive director. Together, we crafted the mission statement and application process for the scholarships and grants we would offer. Rebecca came to visit more often. She never mentioned her sister, and I didn't ask. The pain was still too fresh. 2 months after the confrontation, Sarah called. Her voice was hesitant, subdued. Dad, I've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened, about what Alan and I were planning. She took a shaky breath. I can't justify it. I can't even explain it. Except to say that somehow over the years, the money, the inheritance, it all started to seem like something we were entitled to, not something we should be grateful for. I listened without interrupting. The hurt was still there, but beneath it was something else. A glimmer of hope that perhaps not everything was lost. Alan and I are separating, she continued. After everything came out, I couldn't look at him the same way, couldn't look at myself the same way. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. I don't expect you to forgive me, Sarah said. I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I did. What we were planning to do was wrong, terribly wrong. After a moment of silence, I asked, what will you do now? I'm looking for a place of my own, something modest. I need to reevaluate a lot of things in my life. She paused. The kids miss you, especially Tommy. He keeps asking when we can visit Grandpa again. I thought of my grandson, of the fishing trips we used to take, of his gap-toothed smile. I miss them too. Could we come by sometime, just to visit? No agenda, no discussion of money or the foundation or anything like that. Just family. Family. The word still held pain, but also possibility. I'd like that, I said finally. How about Sunday? I could make lunch. A year passed. The foundation awarded its first scholarships to 30 students, hard-working kids who reminded me of myself at their age, determined to build something from nothing. At the award ceremony, I sat between Rebecca and Sarah, who had slowly begun rebuilding their relationship. Tommy and his sister Emma sat with their cousins, Rebecca's boys, drawing pictures for the new students they had adopted as part of the foundation's mentorship program. The Hilton Head House was now used for summer retreats for the scholarship recipients, a place where they could rest and dream and plan their futures. I spent more time there myself, walking the beaches Margaret had loved, feeling her presence in the salt air and the cry of the gulls. Alan had moved to Chicago after the divorce. His business interests in Georgia collapsed following the Mitchell scandal. I heard he was selling medical equipment for a large corporation now, a job, not an ownership position. Sarah had downsized dramatically, moved into a modest townhouse and returned to accounting full-time. She volunteered for the foundation on weekends, reviewing scholarship applications with a keen eye for detail that made her a valuable asset. On a warm September evening, I sat on the deck of the beach house with Rebecca and Sarah watching the sun set over the water. My grandsons were playing a noisy game of cards inside while Emma read a book, her blonde head bent in concentration. Dad, Sarah said quietly, I've been meaning to ask you something. I turned to look at her, noting the new lines around her eyes, the streak of gray that had appeared in her dark hair. The past year had aged her, but there was also a new serenity in her face, a hard-won wisdom. What's that? The foundation. It's doing so much good, more than I ever imagined possible. She looked out at the ocean. I want you to know that I understand now, why you made the choice you did, and I think it was the right one. Rebecca reached over and squeezed her sister's hand, a gesture of forgiveness, of solidarity that would have warmed Margaret's heart to see. It wasn't an easy choice, I said, but sometimes the right choices aren't. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky change from blue to orange to deep purple. Inside, we could hear the children laughing, the sound carried to us on the evening breeze. I was thinking, Rebecca said, breaking the silence, about Mom's birthday next month. Sarah nodded. October 15th. She would have been 73. I thought maybe we could do something special through the foundation, Rebecca continued. Maybe an annual Margaret Hartwell Award for a female student interested in business. Mom was always so proud of being your business partner in the early days. She was the brains of the operation, I said with a smile. I just did the heavy lifting. She'd be so proud of what you've built with the foundation. Dad, Sarah said softly. Of all those students getting opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. It wasn't just me, I acknowledged. Ellen's leadership has been extraordinary, and both of you have contributed so much this past year. It was true. Rebecca had leveraged her connections in the art world to organize auctions that raised additional funds for the foundation. Sarah's financial expertise had helped us structure scholarships to maximize their impact while ensuring the foundation's long-term sustainability. I was so angry at first, Rebecca admitted, looking at her sister. When Dad told me what you and Alan were planning, I couldn't understand how you could do that to him, after everything he and Mom had done for us. Sarah didn't flinch from the painful topic. I couldn't understand it either, looking back. It was like I was a different person then, someone I don't recognize anymore. People can change, I said, thinking of how far we'd all come in the past year, if they want to badly enough. Speaking of change, Rebecca said, her tone lightening, I have some news. She smiled a bit shyly. The gallery's finally turning a profit, 3 months in a row now, and I've been approached about opening a second location in Charleston. Becca, that's wonderful, Sarah exclaimed. I felt a surge of pride. Rebecca had struggled for years to make her art gallery sustainable, pouring her creativity and passion into a business that seemed perpetually on the brink of failure. Now, finally, her persistence was paying off. I couldn't have done it without your advice, Sarah, Rebecca acknowledged. That business plan you helped me develop made all the difference. The two sisters smiled at each other, their relationship healing in ways I hadn't thought possible a year ago. The betrayal had nearly destroyed our family, but somehow, through honesty and hard work and forgiveness, we were finding our way back to each other. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared over the Atlantic, I thought about legacy, not the kind measured in dollars and properties, but the kind measured in lives touched, in values passed down, in lessons learned even from our most painful mistakes. Why don't we go in and see what the kids are up to? I suggested, rising from my chair. Maybe we can all play a game together. As we walked back into the house filled with the voices of my family, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The betrayal had cut deep, but from that wound had grown something unexpected, something that might, in time, prove even more valuable than what was lost. The next morning I woke early, as was my habit now. The dawn light was just beginning to filter through the windows as I made coffee and stepped out onto the beach. The sand was cool beneath my bare feet, the tide low, revealing a vast expanse of packed sand perfect for walking. I thought about the journey of the past year, from that moment on the porch at Thanksgiving when I'd overheard Alan's whispered question to this new reality we were building. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. I suspected it never would, but it had transformed into something else, something that fueled purpose rather than bitterness. As I walked, I noticed a young woman sitting near the water's edge, a notebook open on her lap. I recognized her as Michaela Johnson, one of our scholarship recipients who had joined us for the weekend retreat. 18 years old, brilliant, determined to become a doctor despite growing up in foster care, bouncing between homes throughout her childhood. "Morning, Mr. Hartwell," she called as I approached. "You're up early, Michaela." She smiled, gesturing at the sunrise painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Couldn't miss this. We don't have ocean views in Atlanta." I sat down beside her, giving her plenty of space. "What are you working on?" "Just journaling. Dr. Martinez suggested we write about our goals, our dreams, where we see ourselves in 5 years, 10 years. She looked down at the pages covered in her neat handwriting. "Sometimes it's hard to believe this is real. The scholarship, this house, people who believe in me enough to invest in my future. It's very real," I assured her, "and well-deserved." Michaela was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Hartwell? Something personal?" "You can ask," I said with a smile. I reserve the right not to answer. She nodded, serious beyond her years. "Why did you start the foundation? I know what it says on the website about giving back and creating opportunities, but there are lots of ways to give back. Why this way?" It was a perceptive question, one that went to the heart of the decisions I'd made over the past year. I looked out at the ocean, gathering my thoughts. "I started with 1 truck and a toolbox," I said finally. "No education beyond high school, no family money, just a willingness to work hard and a wife who believed in me. We built something together, something substantial. And along the way we saw how many talented, hard-working young people never get the chances they deserve because they lack resources or connections or someone to advocate for them. I paused, considering how much to share. There was a time recently when I had to make decisions about the legacy I wanted to leave, about what truly matters in the end. And I realized that the greatest satisfaction in my life has come not from what I accumulated, but from what I built that made a difference in other people's lives. Michaela nodded slowly. That makes sense. She looked down at her notebook again. In my journal, I wrote that in 10 years, I want to be finishing my medical residency. And I want to be working part-time at a clinic in my old neighborhood, providing care to kids who don't have regular access to doctors. She smiled, a bit embarrassed. Is that too ambitious? Not at all, I said. The best dreams are the ones that include others. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the sun rise higher in the sky, the day brightening around us. My daughter Sarah will be making breakfast for everyone around 8, I said, rising to my feet. Her French toast is legendary. I'll be there, Michaela promised. And Mr. Hartwell, thank you, not just for the scholarship, but for everything, for showing us what's possible. As I walked back toward the house, I felt Margaret's presence more strongly than I had in a long time. Not as a ghost or a supernatural visitation, but as an enduring influence, a voice of wisdom and compassion that had shaped me, shaped our daughters, shaped the decisions that had led to this moment. We did good, Maggie, I whispered to the morning air. Not perfect, but good. Inside the house, I could hear my family stirring. Rebecca's boys arguing over the bathroom, Emma asking Sarah a question about breakfast, Tommy offering to set the table. The scholarship students would join us soon, bringing their energy, their dreams, their potential to the table. This was the legacy that mattered, not just the money or the properties or the business I'd built, but the values those things represented. Hard work, perseverance, generosity, forgiveness, justice. The foundation was just a vehicle, a means of extending those values beyond my immediate family, beyond my lifetime. I thought about Alan, about his whispered question that Thanksgiving Day. Why is he still alive? The answer was clearer to me now than it had ever been. I was alive to do this work, to create this legacy, to transform betrayal into purpose. As I stepped through the door into the warm, noisy kitchen, Sarah looked up from the stove and smiled at me. A genuine smile, tinged with the sadness of our shared history, but also with hope for our future. Good walk, Dad? She asked. The best, I replied. Now what can I do to help with breakfast? We've got hungry future doctors and engineers to feed. As we moved around the kitchen together, I felt gratitude wash over me. For second chances, for lessons learned, for the opportunity to build something meaningful from the fragments of what had been broken. Not everyone gets such opportunities. Not everyone recognizes them when they come. Why is he still alive? Alan had whispered that day. Now I knew the answer. To live, truly live, with purpose, with love, with an eye toward what endures beyond us. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.